of Michela Summa from University of Würzburg, UniClinic Heidelberg, and the title of the talk is Towards a Transcendental Account of Creativity.
Yeah.
Kant and Merleau-Ponty on the creative power, judgment, and creativity as institution. Yeah, please.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. And I also want to thank Natalia and Georgi for the invitation to the very nice organization of this workshop. And I begin. After having been prominent in Romanticism, creativity has gained a renewed interest in more recent decades, notably in studies produced at the intersection field between philosophy, cognitive sciences, and artificial intelligence. Despite all differences among the currently available proposals, two main ideas seem to be quite generally shared. First, the rejection of extreme position regarding the mystification of creativity as a mental capacity owned by only few individuals and free from constraints. It's too small?
Too small. I'm very sorry. Let's cool down.
Okay. Okay. So I would say the positions which I briefly mentioned there are very different, but they share two main assumptions. So first, the rejection of extreme positions regarding the mystification of creativity as a mental capacity owned by only few individuals and free from constraint. And secondly, the focus on the structure and evolution of cognitive mechanisms that supposedly underlie human creativity. While subscribing to the idea that we shall not mystify creativity, in this paper I wish to argue that what such a demystification primarily requires is not a mapping of supposed cognitive mechanisms, but rather a transcendental and phenomenological inquiry. Important clues to develop such an inquiry are to be found in Kant's and Merleau-Ponty's works. Being aware of the many differences between the philosophical approaches of these two thinkers, I shall nevertheless argue that a joint consideration of their positions can fruitfully contribute to the inquiry into the meaning of creativity. My main assumption is that creativity can be properly understood only in relation with rules. The idea of a primal innovation is a contradictio in adjecto, for the concept of innovation is only meaningful against the background of some established order. Thus, a creative or innovative act is an act producing something which would not be conceivable should we remain within the boundaries of an already given order, and which establishes a new order. The first aspect of the relation between creativity and rules is retrospective and differential. Creativity is what marks a difference within a given order, and in such a way it is something new. Yet, such a relation also has a prospective aspect, consisting in the formation and in the establishment of new rules and a new order. And this implies that creative products are valuable or meaningful. In what follow, I will show how Kant in section 1 and Merleau-Ponty in section 2 contribute to better clarify such a view on creativity. Kant's critique of the power of judgment has the merit to have brought before the interdependence relation between rules and creativity. Only if there are rules, it is possible to talk about creativity as producing something that goes beyond such rules, and only if there is creativity, rules and their applications are meaningful. Although genius is what first comes to mind when one thinks about creativity in the third critique, I believe that a creative moment is also proper to the power of judgment as such, so that creativity not only plays a role in the production of fine art, but also in the genesis of knowledge. And I begin with creativity and the power of judgment. Why do I believe that the power of judgment is creative? For two reasons. First, it is creative in the process of the application of rules, and secondly, in the genesis of concepts. As to the first point, I will be brief concerning determining judgments and try to sum up the arguments I would make for suggesting that also determining judgment has a creative aspect in itself. And I would have 4 premises. The first one relates to the previous previous definition I've given of creativity. Creativity, first, producing something that is not conceivable only on the basis of given rules, and second, establishes new rules or a new meaning. And this is what I've started with. Second premise is there cannot be a rule for the application of all rules, for this would imply an infinite regress. This is Kant's famous argument. A rule can be applied with stupidity by merely following a procedure without acknowledging the singularity of a situation. And finally, and the rule can also be applied with judgment if the singularity of each situation is properly acknowledged and subsumed by determining judgment under the relevant universal. And finally, only when judgment is at play can we speak about acquiring knowledge in a proper sense. From these 5 premises, I believe, follow 4 consequences. First one, the application of a rule cannot simply derive from the rule itself. The power that is responsible for such application is creative, as it produces something that is not conceivable on the basis of the rule only. Second, determining judgment is the power responsible for such application. Third, determining judgment is creative in at least one of the above-mentioned senses, namely the former. And fourth, the knowledge yielded by determining judgment also requires creativity in the just mentioned sense. The substantium in concreto can be considered as creative in at least one of the above-mentioned senses. The novelty here consists in the concrete knowledge produced by the application of a general rule to a singular case, something which is not conceivable on the basis of the mastery of abstract rules only. Creativity implies, in this sense, the capacity to grasp the situation as a whole and to have an insight into how the generality of a given rule can be suitable to a given empirical context or object in concreto. The importance of this aspect of creativity is remarkable both in the sphere of practical and theoretical reason. In both cases, judgment is at play when the contingency of a particular situation is properly acknowledged and taken into account for the application of the rule. I come to the second aspect related to judgment. As it is well known, Kant distinguishes determining judgments responsible for the substantiation of singular cases under a given rule from reflecting judgments, finding a rule under which given singularities belong. I wish to argue that reflecting judgment is created in both of the above-mentioned senses. First, it finds a rule that was not previously given, thus establishing novelty with respect to an order. And secondly, it is exemplary for new judgment and a new order, and this is what makes it valuable. Come to the aspect of novelty. Reflecting judgment does not subsume particular case under an already given universal, but rather finds the universal, the concept or the rule, which is not yet known for a given particular. Therefore, it plays a crucial role for the formation of new concepts, and it is a necessary base for the empirical knowledge. The idea of the subjective universality of reflecting judgment is formulated in the context of the inquiry into how judgment can be considered to be conform to rule and thus yield knowledge. Although it is not subjected to any given rule, indeed even reflecting judgment does need a principle, for it is still a cognitive faculty, and it must serve as a principle in itself, as Kant says. The discussion of the characteristic rule conformity of reflecting judgment is embedded within Kant's theory of the free play between imagination and understanding, and this is both a resource and a limit within Kant's framework. It is a resource because of the creative potential in the formation of universals, yet it is also a limit because such concepts only have a subjective value and play a role in the genesis of knowledge without, however, grounding objective cognition. Nevertheless, such a genesis is itself something indispensable for the formation of knowledge and implies the conformity of the imaginative power to a concept or a rule in general. The conformity of reflecting judgments to a rule is subjectively grounded on the agreement of the faculties of imagination and understanding, or on the harmony between the freedom of the former and the lawfulness of the latter. And it is expressed by what Kant calls schematism without a concept. In this framework, the creative power of the imagination only expresses itself in and through the relation with the lawfulness of the understanding. And it is this relation that makes its creative productiveness in the formation of empirical concepts and cognition possible. As to valuableness, as I mentioned, creativity has not only this retrospective, differential aspect, but also a prospective character related to the valuableness of its products. Such valuableness is related to the exemplary character of creative acts and products, which we can find expressed also in reflective judgment. Reflective judgment institutes the necessity of subjective and universal, or, and quote, a necessity of the assent to all to a judgment that is regarded as an example of a universal rule that one cannot produce. On the basis of such a test for universal assent, reflective judgments are exemplary in that they institute a new domain of meaningfulness. Examples can be understood as subjective rules for judgment, that is, rules that can be grasped and contextually applied by other subjects in different situations. Thus, examples not only require creativity in the production, but also in the perception. Taking something as an example requires an interpretation of what is given in relation to the contingent situation, and this cannot be simply prescribed by the application of a procedure considered as standard. And this becomes even clearer if we consider now, finally, the creativity of genius. Embedding the section on genius in a larger account of the creative nature of the power of judgment allows us to understand why Kant's claim that products of genius are only to be found in fine art is not incompatible with an account of the role of creativity for knowledge and experience in general. Several features characterizing judgment are also proper to genius. First, although they do establish what I have called a differential relation to some rule, both judgment and genius are not themselves subject to already given rules. Secondly, both judgment and genius are considered to be natural gifts or talent. And thirdly, both is something, a judgment of taste or a product of fine art, exemplary. Kant defined genius as, quote, a talent, natural gift that gives the rule to art, end of quote. It is a creative talent, since it produces something that was not previously available, nor producible on the basis of already given rules. It is, quote, a talent for producing that for which no determinate rule can be given, not a predisposition of skill for that which can be learned in accordance with some rules, end of quote. Originality, thus, is the first feature that Kant recognizes to be proper of the products of genius. The originality of genius is due to productive imagination, which is free from conceptual constraints and nevertheless spontaneously or harmonizes with the requirement of the understanding. Like in the case of the power of judgment, genius is not producing out of nothingness. Its creativity rather consists in establishing a difference with respect to already established rules. Yet the opening sentence of paragraph 46 in the third critique also says that genius as a natural talent gives the rule to art, and this implies that the creative products of genius are not merely new with respect to an already given order, but instead they introduce new rules. And this is due to the exemplary nature of the products of genius. I quote again, since there can be also original nonsense, its products, the product of genius, must at the same time be models, that is exemplary, hence, while not themselves the result of imitation, they must serve others in that way, that is, as a standard or a rule for judging. End of quote. The valuableness of creative products is strictly related to such exemplariness, according to which creative products are not something idiosyncratic, but rather can be recognized as models. Products of genius are examples or models for inspiration or emulation rather than for imitation. They can be useful only if you recognize them as examples, if we are able to relate them to the specificity of each experiential context, and if we do not take them as templates to be copied, as in imitation, but rather as models to be grasped, interpreted, and applied in a productive way. A connected important aspect for the discussion of creativity is the impossibility to describe or indicate scientifically or to teach how products of genius are brought into being. Considering creative acts and aesthetic ideas as withdrawing from full reconstruction and explanation also implies that these are not the result of a fully controlled planning and rather have a responsive character. This is related to the fact that, as I said above, creative ideas and actions emerge when we have to cope with facticity and contingency. To anticipate a concept that we will find in Merleau-Ponty, we can say that the originality and the exemplariness of the product of genius, and notably of aesthetic ideas, have an instituting power, in that they possibly yield new kinds of experiences and can establish the basis for the genesis of new knowledge. I come to my second and last part. Merleau-Ponty's approach to transcendental philosophy is certainly complex. Contra Kant and with Husserl, he argues that transcendental and the a priori are not to be considered as exclusively formal. Moreover, he does not subscribe to the claim of transcendental idealism, according to which the ultimate focus of the transcendental locus of the transcendental conditions is the subject's mind. Against the just mentioned ontological and epistemological assumptions, Merleau-Ponty argues that the locus of the transcendental and the a priori is the pre-objective temporal being of perception, and this does not mean that the subject and object disappears. Rather, they are considered as co-original terms within original pre-objective being. Merleau-Ponty's attempt, thus, is that of reshaping transcendental philosophy, and his research project is also entails a reassessment of the role of subjectivity in the process of sense formation. Researchers focusing on Merleau-Ponty, reframing of the transcendental project, have mostly focused on its Husserlian filiation, yet considering how such a transcendental project is mirrored in Merleau-Ponty's remark on creativity, we shall see how, despite all differences, there is a relevant convergence with Kant's thought. Although it is rarely thematized, the concept of creativity is operative at different stages of Merleau-Ponty's production. What is characteristic of all these remarks can be considered as a development of the suggestion I gave toward the end of the previous paragraph, considering the impossibility to fully reconstruct or teach creative processes. This view suggests that creative thoughts and actions have a responsive character. They cannot be considered as a result of some already established plan or intention, rather being original responses to some contingent affordance. Accordingly, for Merleau-Ponty, creativity testifies to the constitutive embeddedness of subjectivity in the world and to the essential function of our relationship with others in the process of meaning formation. Against this background, and in line with Kant, Merleau-Ponty argues that creativity has a differentiating power with respect to an already established domain of rules, which derives from historical genealogical sedimentations. Moreover, creativity not simply produces something idiosyncratically new, but rather institutes new rules and a new domain of meaning. The text in which the nexus between creativity and rules is most systematically investigated is the 54 course at Collège de France, entitled L'institution dans l'histoire personnelle et publique. The concept of institution is here considered to be the only one capable to philosophically express the meaning of a new beginning that is realized in and through creative processes. This concept brings to the fore the interdependence relation between creativity and rules without implying that subjectivity is the ultimate transcendental ground. The French word institution, which Merleau-Ponty adopts as a translation of the German Stiftung, is somehow ambiguous, as it can refer to both an established organ characterized by inner rules and to the instituting processes, that is, to the process that brings forth and establishes something new. Such a double meaning also mirrors the interconnection between a framework of rules to be applied in a contingent context, a differentiating moment that introduces new rule or a new way of interpreting and applying rules, and the establishing of a new lawfulness. Already at this stage, we find the two main aspects of the transcendental account of creativity that we have highlighted in Kant. First, creativity underlies institution, understood as new beginning of something that was not conceivable on the basis of already accepted rules. And secondly, insofar as the beginning is always a beginning of something, the process of institution grounds new rules. According to Merleau-Ponty, instituting means installing a difference, a divergence within the norm, establishing new rules in relation to which other divergences are possible. The relation between embeddedness within an order and openness toward a future or a new order is the background against which all creative instances shall be understood. Although Merleau-Ponty does not use the same terminology, there is here also convergence with Kant's claim that establishing a new horizon of meaningfulness, which was not given and not even thinkable on the basis of already given rules, shall be considered as exemplary. Creativity establishes a new way of thinking and acting, which becomes a model for future acting and thinking. Yet, such a model needs to be received, grasped, interpreted, and applied. These processes, which for Kant require the power of judgment, are rephrased by Merleau-Ponty in terms of institution and reactivation. Institution is exemplary in that it is responsible for the positing of a style, or for the opening of a new meaningful and yet open horizon of meaning. The commonality with Kant's exemplarity of the product of creativity consists in the observation that what is newly established is not a template to be imitated or copied, but rather needs to be interpreted in the shaping of the gestalt-like unity of a style. Such an understanding of creativity as institution presupposes, however, Merleau-Ponty's reframing of transcendental philosophy. Particularly, the concept of institution is adopted to explicitly signal the difference from the idea that transcendental subjectivity is the constituting principle of meaningfulness. The origin of creativity as institution is not the subjective mind, but rather the in-between subjectivity and the word and otherness in general, both taken in their temporal becoming. In claiming this, Merleau-Ponty still conceives of subjectivity as a necessary moment in the institution of new horizon of meaningfulness, and yet he emphasizes that the subject is inseparably, so is not constituting, but rather inseparably instituting and instituted. Rather than being constituted, it is exposed to otherness, and its productive activity shall be understood as a responsive moment of such a relation to otherness, which opens up for the future. All these aspects, which I have here summarized, find expression in what we can call the application of this general idea to concrete phenomena, and I particularly consider the proto-creativity which emerged in behavior, in the organism already, and then more directly the expression of creativity in language and art, and also the role of creativity in the formation of knowledge. In all these cases, creative products are embedded in the network of sedimented rule, yet they cannot straightforwardly result from them, but rather require a change and the capacity to grasp such a change as exemplary. I think I kind of summarized what I mean by that by referring to the text related to creativity and expression and creativity and knowledge, but I think we are running out of time.
I think we have.
Okay, so shall I go to a conclusion, or do I have time to go through these two?
I think you can do a conclusion.
Okay, then I move on to the conclusion, and we can go back maybe to the parts, more concrete aspects which emerge in relation to expression and knowledge. So throughout this paper, I've argued that the demystification of creativity does not primarily pass through the mapping of cognitive mechanisms that supposedly underlie the emergence of creative ideas. The very meaning of the concept of creativity needs to be embedded in the structures of transcendental experience. The price to pay for exclusively maintaining the focus on the mapping of uncontrollable mechanism, indeed, is that of another mystification, the mystification of these very mechanisms and their rules, as supposedly maneuvering over our thoughts and actions. To avoid this, the intentional dimension of sense-making and the embeddedness of all mental activity in the relational network that makes up experience of the world as a whole need to be adequately taken into account. I suggested that the transcendental account of creativity has two sides, as it requires both an analysis of the condition for creative acts and an inquiry into how creativity itself grounds the formation of new meaningfulness. Kant and Merleau-Ponty focus on both sides by shedding light on the interdependence relation between creative acts and rules. Moreover, for both thinkers, creative acts have a responsive character related to the contingent moment of experience. Where the two approaches depart from each other is the function of creativity in the formation of knowledge. Whereas for Kant, creativity cannot ground objective knowledge, but only the subjective genesis thereof. Such a distinction disappears in Merleau-Ponty. This is due to the latter's revised understanding of the transcendental, which, however, I believe shall be considered within the line traced by Kant. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, Mika, thank you very much for your interesting talk. And now it's time for questions.
Gerne auch auf Deutsch.
Okay, please.
Darf ich Deutsch hören? Ja. Also, während du gesprochen hast, habe ich so viel gedacht, vor allem über Merleau-Ponty, habe ich so viel an Gadamer gedacht. Also, meine Frage ist immer die Kreativität, über die du gesprochen hast, immer zusammen mit der Interpretation? Also der Interpretationsbegriff ist der zentral in dieser Perspektive, oder? Oder also gibt es mehr Kreativität im strikten Sinne oder gibt es mehr Interpretationen?
Ja, also ich denke, mehr als Interpretation im Sinne Gadamers, und das hätte ich auch geführt in dem Teil, wo es um Kreativität und also Erkenntnis geht. Ich denke, bei Merleau-Ponty ist vielmehr das Sehen einer Gestalt, und er verweist, also mit seinen Anmerkungen zum Thema, verweist er vor allem auf Wertheimers Productive Thinking. Und diese Idee von produktives Denken beruht für Wertheimer auf das Sehen von gestaltmäßigen Einheiten. So zum Beispiel er untersucht Kinder, die irgendwie Gauss-Theorem, also wie verstehen sie den Gauss-Theorem? Und er zeigt, wie sie das kreativ verstehen, indem sie selber eine Regel finden durch die Interpretation einer Gestalt. Aber ich denke nicht, dass das die Interpretation im Sinne Gadamers ist. Es ist
fast eine Stratifikation, also es gibt keinen Sprung, es gibt nicht ein oder nicht. Eine Kontinuität, können wir sagen.
Das würde ich auch so. Ich würde nicht sagen,
weiß ich nicht.
Nee, also ich sehe so mehr, es gibt tatsächlich einen Moment, das kann man mit Waldenfels ausdrücken, das ist ein Moment des Widerfahrens. Also man sieht eine Gestalt oder man trifft etwas, was man mit dem Instrumentarium, das man hat, nicht lösen kann. Man sieht ein Problem vielleicht, und dann braucht man eine neue Regel. Und meistens trifft, also ich denke, so diese responsive Idee oder kontrastive Idee wollte ich gerade das ausdrücken. Also es gibt etwas, was mir widerfährt, und die kreative Antwort folgt auf dieses Widerfahren.
Okay, please.
You say that you're engaged in a process of the demystification of creativity.
Yeah.
I'm quite mystified still. Creativity can't be taught, for example, you say, right? The question that you don't seem to address in this paper is a traditional question, namely about the origin of the work of art, creativity, etc., etc. There's a whole tradition of this tracing back through Heidegger, all the way back to Aristotle. Because we do have in Heidegger and in people like Aristotle an attempt to demystify, an attempt to explain the origin of creativity and therefore the work of art. right? Whether it's the fourfold in Heidegger, or whether it's improvisation in Aristotle. I mean, Aristotle is quite clear in the Poetics that he completely agrees with you. Poiesis is the same as prato, or pratein, and therefore every action, every doing and making is creative act, a work of art, if you will, right? Poiesis, in the most general sense, in philosophy, thinking, well, et cetera, et cetera. These are all creative acts, that's not the issue. But he does say, right, that the origin of art and of creativity is autos ke diazo, right? I improvise. It's this improvisation out of which tragedy and comedy come. And it's this improvisation is the origin of the work of art that we have, therefore, to think if we're going to demystify art for Aristotle. For Heidegger, obviously, it's the fourfold, and we have to be a whole other discussion. So I wonder if you see in Merleau-Ponty or in Kant an origin of the work of art. And would that then help to demystify?
Yeah, well, with this idea of demystification, I wanted to kind of take over something from the debate which is going on mostly in the cognitive sciences, where there is indeed an attempt to go against the romantic idea of creativity as something which is peculiar to only a few persons and so on. And I think, and this is my main argument actually, that the demystification, so if we don't want, and I wouldn't subscribe to the idea that this is something so very peculiar to some individual that are somehow, that have some gifts that others don't have and so on. But the crucial aspect is to investigate how something is created with respect to something else, and this something else is an order. And this is my main aspect, and I found, for this reason, I think Kant is the main reference point, and I find, to say, some changes, but also a same line, of course, in Merleau-Ponty. What about the origin? I think it's, I should have made it more explicit. I think the origins is precisely in this widerfahrnis moment. So in this, Merleau-Ponty writes this in the Institution course. He says, I'm confronted with an impasse, and I have to find. And of course, I think Aristotle would be good here, because what I do there is not that I kind of have an intention or already have a plan how to solve it, but I improvise. I try it out, and then from there, something like gestaltmäßiges Verhalten emerges, which becomes established, and in this moment it is established and it's valuable for the future and can be taken as an example in the future. And it is precisely in this moment from the Übergang, so to say, from the Widerfahrnis to the concretization of the answer, that something creative emerges. But I would be then sympathetic with Aristotle. I would have to think about Heidegger, but with too much.
No, it's just interesting that the word for improvisation, if you translate it as improvisation, is not improvisore in the Italian sense of it at all, right?
Yeah.
In the Greek, it's autos ke diazo, which is self-schematization.
Yeah.
Right? So precisely creating a rule, right? While one creates a rule oneself out of oneself, but one also at the same time creates oneself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So it's precisely this kind of relation. I think you find it very, very fruitful to look at that.
Yeah.
The poetics again.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I would like only to ask you to precise one thing. Is Kant's division, Kant's distinction between analytics and dialectics of importance for you, for your reconstruction of Kant's position? Because you are right, creativity in Kant cannot ground objective knowledge. But what about philosophy? Kant says that the philosopher is a creator of principles.
Yeah, you're right. It makes sense, but what I wanted to emphasize also not to, let's say, to over-interpret Kant in the light of Merleau-Ponty or of the phenomenological tradition. I wanted to make clear and insist on that the universality of reflecting judgment is a subjective universality, it's not the objective universality of determining judgments. That was the only point I wanted to make and with this distinction. But you're right, indeed. So one point would be this one. Is the philosopher then a kind of genius?
Yeah.
In that sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Dankeschön für den schönen Vortrag, der mich überzeugt hat. Ja, ich habe eine erste Bemerkung. Der erste Denker, der eine Parallele gezogen hat zwischen Gestaltphilosophie und schöpferischer Aktivität, schöpferischer Tätigkeit im erkenntnistheoretischen Bereich vor Waldenfels ist Thomas Kuhn. Und schon vor Thomas Kuhn bei Heidegger und bei Alexandre Koyré finden wir eine tiefe Überlegung über epistemologische Zäsuren in der Geschichte der Wissenschaft. Und das Problem ist genau folgendes: Wie man von einem Paradigma zu einem anderen übergehen kann.
Ja.
Das ist aber der Problem der schöpferischen Aktivität.
Ja, auf jeden Fall. Also vielen Dank für den Hinweis. Tatsächlich, also ich kenne mich tatsächlich auch zu wenig aus, aber das wäre vielleicht so wirklich, wenn ich das tiefer jetzt jenseits dieses relativ allgemeine Ansatz, den ich hier dargestellt habe, aber wenn ich mehr, was ich auch gerne machen möchte jetzt in Zukunft, auf diese epistemologische Richtung gehen würde, da wäre tatsächlich die Autorin, worauf ich mich dann beziehen sollte. Ja.
Und eine zweite Bemerkung. Sie haben gesagt, dass der Grund der schöpferischen Aktivität für Merleau-Ponty nicht im Geiste, sondern im Dazwischen, das zwischen Geist und Welt ist. Im Gegenteil der Husserlslehre. Aber ich meine, nach Husserlslehre ist der Grund der schöpferischen Tätigkeit nicht im reinen Geist.
Das stimmt, ja. Ja.
Da das transzendentale Ego eine intentionelle Struktur hat.
Ja, nein, das war mehr so ein Anwand gegen Kant, weil wenn man zum Beispiel, so tatsächlich auch so in den Vorlesungen zur Natur oder selbst in den Institutionen gibt es so Anmerkungen zu Kant und der Merleau-Ponty ist sehr kritisch und sagt, nein, das ist reiner Subjektivismus, das will ich nicht. Aber ich gehöre sozusagen zu den Lekteuren von Merleau-Ponty oder Leser von Merleau-Ponty, die ihn also so eher als der Transzendentalphilosophie gehörig lesen. Deswegen war für mich zum Beispiel ein Artikel von Sebastian Gardner sehr einleuchtend, der gerade so diese antinomischen Gedankenweise bei Merleau-Ponty wieder konstruiert. Aber tatsächlich, also diese Subjektivismuskritik passt auf Husserl gar nicht.
Okay, other questions? No questions.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much.